1:05 in the morning, Al-Anbar Province, Iraq. Ballistic missiles were already screaming through the upper atmosphere toward Ain al-Assad airbase. This was not the typical limited harassment seen in months prior. It was a calculated saturation strike designed to overwhelm the logic of modern interceptors. The question facing the operators below was no longer if they could hit a target. The question was if they could hit 50 of them at once. The air over the Iraqi desert was thin and freezing at 80,000 feet. Below the missiles, the vast expanse of the Al-Anbar desert looked like a sea of black glass. Within the perimeter of the airbase, thousands of personnel were asleep. They were unaware that 20 tons of high explosives were currently falling toward them at Mach 3.5. Inside the Combat Information Center, the atmosphere shifted in a heartbeat. The green glow of the radar consoles reflected in the eyes of young technicians. The tactical officer spoke first. Thermal bloom detected. Multiple launches from Kermanshah. The commander leaned forward. Confirm count. Counting 10, 20. Wait. The screen is filling up. We have 50 inbound signatures. 50. That is not a demonstration. That is an execution. Ain al-Assad was the crown jewel of American regional presence. It housed the heavy hitters. 6 advanced fighter aircraft sat in the hangars. They were fueled and ready for a morning sortie that would likely never happen. The base was defended by the Patriot Advanced Capability 3 system. It was the most sophisticated missile defense shield in the world. But every shield has a breaking point. The system was designed to handle a dozen threats simultaneously. 50 was a mathematical nightmare. 300 miles to the east, in the mountains near Kermanshah, Iranian crews watched their telemetry. They did not use radio. They used hardline fiber optics to avoid detection. The commander there watched the 50 digital dots arching toward the west. He knew the Americans would intercept most of them. He also knew they did not need all 50 to hit. They only needed a handful to reach the target. The logic of the attack was simple. If the Americans fired 2 interceptors for every 1 incoming missile, they would run out of ready-to-fire canisters before the sky was clear. It was a battle of inventory versus intent. The Iranian commander checked his watch. The first impact was less than 3 minutes away. On the ground at Ain al-Assad, the Patriot batteries began to pivot. The massive radar arrays hummed as they surged with power. They searched the sky for the tiny, fast-moving pinpricks of light. In the bunkers, the soldiers felt the vibration of the generators through the floor. It was a low, rhythmic thrumming that matched the racing hearts of the men and women at the consoles. The first interceptor launched with a roar that shook the earth for miles. A streak of white fire climbed into the black sky. It was followed by another, then 10 more. The air defense crew worked in total silence. There was no shouting. There was only the clicking of keys and the steady breath of the operators. They were no longer fighting a war of politics. They were fighting a war of seconds. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 1:07 in the morning. 22,000 miles above the Persian Gulf, a constellation of satellites detected a massive thermal bloom. The space-based infrared system did not see missiles. It saw heat. 50 distinct white-hot points of light ignited against the dark terrain of western Iran. Within seconds, the data was processed, encrypted, and beamed to a command center in Qatar, and then to the bunkers at Ain al-Assad. The alert at the airbase was not a siren. It was a digital scream across every headset in the Combat Information Center. The technical sergeant at the radar console felt his pulse jump. He stared at the screen as the software struggled to assign tracking numbers to the flood of incoming data. The tactical director leaned over his shoulder. "What am I looking at?" The sergeant did not look up. "Sir, this is a saturation event. I have 50 confirmed ballistic tracks. They are out of the boost phase. They are coasting. Re-entry will begin in less than 3 minutes. Confirm the type. Speed and trajectory match the Fateh 110. These are guided, sir. They are not just falling, they are aiming. 1:12 in the morning. In a reinforced bunker on the eastern edge of the base, the Patriot battery commander watched his own displays. Each Patriot launcher held 4 missiles. He had 3 batteries active. That was 12 canisters ready to fire. At 2 interceptors per incoming target, he could only reliably engage 6 missiles before his crews had to reload in the middle of a firestorm. The math was impossible. The commander keyed his radio. Control. This is Guardian 1. We have a target priority conflict. We cannot engage all 50. Requesting priority list for high-value assets. The response from the Air Operations Center was immediate. Guardian, protect the hangars and the fuel farm. Everything else is secondary. You are cleared to engage at maximum range. Copy. Engaging now. 1:15 in the morning. The first Patriot missile left its rail with a sound like the sky tearing apart. It was followed by a second, then a third. The ground shook with the rhythmic percussion of the launches. The interceptors climbed at steep angles, their white exhaust plumes carving jagged lines into the night. Hundreds of miles away, the Iranian commander in Kermanshah watched the same engagement on a long-range radar feed. He saw the American interceptors rising to meet his swarm. He turned to his deputy. They are firing. They are using their best rounds on the first wave. Tell the second unit to prepare the final 10. We will wait for the American magazines to run dry. The first intercept happened at 60,000 feet. There was no sound at that altitude, only a brilliant flash of orange and white as the kinetic kill vehicle of the Patriot smashed into the nose of a Fateh missile. The debris cloud expanded in a perfect circle, shredding several nearby decoys. On the radar screens at Ain al-Assad, one green dot vanished, then another. The system was working, but for every dot that disappeared, 3 more moved closer. The incoming swarm was beginning to dive. As the missiles hit the thicker air of the lower atmosphere, their control fins began to bite. They started to maneuver. Inside the Combat Information Center, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and sweat. The sergeant shouted over the noise of the cooling fans. They are braking! The targets are zigzagging! The radar is losing the lock on tracks 14 and 15. The tactical director grabbed the edge of the console. Reacquire. If we lose them now, they will hit the base before we can recycle the launchers. The screen flickered. A red warning light began to pulse on the main display. The system was processing at its absolute limit. Outside, the sky was a chaotic web of fire and smoke, but the real battle was happening inside the silicon brains of the guidance computers. The sergeant's voice was lower now. Sir, we have a problem. The interceptors are targeting the same 5 missiles. The logic is looping. There are 40 targets left, and we are out of ready missiles on Battery Alpha. The morning air vibrated with the whistling of the incoming rounds. The first wave had been the distraction. The real threat was just behind it. 1:17 in the morning. The sky over the Al-Anbar desert was no longer black. It was a jagged grid of intersecting white lines and orange bursts. At 60,000 feet, the first wave of interceptions was reaching its peak. The Patriot advanced capability. 3 interceptors were performing a technical ballet of extreme physics. Unlike older missiles, these did not carry a traditional explosive warhead. They were kinetic kill vehicles. They were designed to strike the incoming ballistic missile nose to nose. It was a bullet hitting a bullet at 5 times the speed of sound. Inside the Combat Information Center, the sound of the cooling fans was a constant drone. The tactical director watched the primary display. Each successful hit was marked by a small white flash on the screen. The software then deleted the track. The sergeant at the console spoke. His voice was flat, professional. Target 22 neutralized. Target 23 neutralized. Target 24 is a confirmed kill. The director looked at the remaining icons. How many are left in the first wave? 16 targets remaining in the primary corridor. Battery Bravo is engaging now. Outside, the noise was a rhythmic thumping that rattled the teeth of every soldier in the bunkers. Every few seconds, the ground surged. The Patriot launchers were firing in rapid succession. The exhaust from the solid rocket motors filled the air with a thick, acrid smell of burnt chemicals. 1:19 in the morning. 200 miles away, the Iranian surveillance teams were using passive electronic sensors to map the American defenses. They were not looking for the missiles. They were looking for the radar signatures. The Iranian deputy commander leaned over a digital map. The Americans are prioritizing the center of the base. They have vacated the northern approach to cover the hangars. Their logic is predictable. They are protecting the aircraft. The commander nodded. Signal the third unit. Launch the maneuvering variants now. We will exploit the gap in their radar coverage. Back at al-Assad, the technical strain was becoming visible. The phased array radar was designed to track hundreds of objects, but the processing power required to guide 12 interceptors simultaneously was pushing the system to its limit. On the screens, the digital tracks began to jitter. This was the noise of a saturated battlefield. The sergeant wiped sweat from his eyes. Director, the radar is experiencing high processor load. The update rate is dropping. I am seeing ghost tracks on the northern flank. The director tightened his grip on his chair. Is it interference or an actual launch? I cannot classify it yet. The signal-to-noise ratio is too low. The Patriot system was a masterpiece of Cold War engineering. It was built to stop a Soviet air raid. It was not built to manage a swarm of 50 guided missiles launched by a computer program. The computer on the ground was now arguing with the computers in the sky. The interceptors were trying to decide which threat was the most dangerous. The sergeant's hands moved across the keyboard. Target 28 is accelerating. It is performing a terminal dive maneuver. Speed is now Mach 4.2. The director leaned in. Engage with 2 rounds. Do not let it get below 10,000 feet. Negative. Battery Bravo is reloading. Battery Charlie is currently occupied with the western swarm. We have a gap. A heavy silence fell over the room. For 3 seconds, the only sound was the hum of the electronics. On the screen, a single red dot detached itself from the clutter of the northern sky. It was not being engaged. It was moving faster than any of the previous targets. Guardian 1. This is Control. You have a leaker. North-northeast. Altitude 15,000 and dropping. The response from the battery was clipped. We see it. We are trying to slave the launcher. The motors are not responding fast enough. The red dot crossed the perimeter of the airbase. It was no longer a data point on a screen. It was a physical object. It was a ton of steel and high explosives moving at half a mile per second. The morning was no longer quiet. The sound of the incoming missile was a low-frequency scream that could be felt in the marrow of the bone. 1:12 in the morning. The sky over Ain al-Assad was a chaotic tapestry of fire. The incoming Fateh 110 missiles were no longer predictable ballistic arcs. As they hit the denser air at 20,000 feet, their terminal guidance systems took control. These were the Block 3 variants. They were equipped with movable fins and optical sensors. They began to pull high-G maneuvers. They were weaving. They were hunting. Inside the Combat Information Center, the radar sergeant shouted to be heard over the rising electronic whine of the consoles. Director, targets 30 through 35 are breaking formation. They are performing erratic pitch axis maneuvers. The Patriot logic cannot find a constant solution. The tactical director gripped the back of the sergeant's chair. Tell the batteries to shift to manual override. Use the proximity fuse logic. Do not wait for a kinetic hit. 1:13 in the morning. A few miles away, at the Patriot battery site, the heat from the repeated launches had turned the sand into glass. The reload crews were huddled in a reinforced concrete bunker, waiting for a gap in the fire to rush out and replenish the empty canisters. Each launcher was now a smoking skeleton of steel. The battery commander spoke into his headset. Control. This is Guardian 1. We have exhausted our primary magazines. We are down to the last 4 interceptors in Battery Alpha. Battery Bravo is reporting a sensor malfunction due to debris clutter. The sky is too dirty. We are swinging blind. The controller at the Air Operations Center responded immediately. Guardian, you are cleared for final ditch engagement. If you cannot hit the nose, hit the body. We have 6 aircraft in Hangar 4 that cannot be moved. They are the priority. Copy. We are engaging targets 36 and 37. God help us on the rest. 1:14 in the morning. The saturation tactic was reaching its mathematical conclusion. The Iranian strategy had worked. By firing 50 missiles, they had forced the American defenders to fire nearly 100 interceptors in less than 10 minutes. The supply of ready-to-fire missiles on the rails was gone. The intercept math had reached zero. On the Iranian side, the command center was eerily quiet. They were no longer launching, they were watching. The final wave of 10 missiles was the most advanced. These carried specialized submunitions designed to deploy just before impact. The Iranian commander watched the telemetry. The American radar is saturated. Their interceptors are chasing decoys and debris. Our final 3 guided units are in the clear. Impact in 45 seconds. Inside Hangar number 4 at al-Assad, the ground crew had given up on moving the aircraft. The massive steel doors were jammed by the vibration of a nearby intercept. 6 advanced fighters sat in a row. They were millions of dollars of technology rendered helpless by a few tons of falling steel. A young mechanic sat on the floor with his back against a landing gear strut. He didn't look at the ceiling. He looked at a small puddle of hydraulic fluid on the concrete. The puddle was dancing. The vibration was no longer coming from the Patriot launches. It was the sound of the air being pushed aside by the final 3 missiles. 1:15 in the morning. The first of the leakers struck the western edge of the runway. The shock wave shattered every window in the control tower. The second missile hit the fuel farm. A pillar of orange flame rose 500 feet into the air, turning the night into a terrifying imitation of noon. The third missile was different. It did not hit the dirt. It corrected its flight path at 500 feet, its nose-mounted camera locking onto the distinct shape of Hangar number 4. The tactical director in the Combat Information Center saw the track merge with the base map. He didn't speak. He didn't shout. He simply closed his eyes. The sound was not an explosion. It was the sound of the world ending. 1:15 in the morning. The sky over al-Assad was a graveyard of falling metal. The final Fateh 110 missile was no longer a data point. It was a physical weight in the air. At 3,000 feet, its terminal guidance system made a final, aggressive correction. The optical seeker on the nose of the missile had locked onto the heat signature of the generators near Hangar number 4. The missile was descending at a 60-degree angle. Its speed had bled off to Mach 2.8, but it still possessed enough kinetic energy to punch through several feet of reinforced concrete. Inside the Combat Information Center, the radar sergeant stared at a screen that was now a mess of flickering red icons. The electronic noise from the previous 47 interceptions had created a cloud of ionized air and debris that blinded the short-range sensors. "I have lost the track," the sergeant shouted. "The clutter is too high. I cannot see the final leaker." The tactical director looked at the status board. Battery Alpha was empty. Battery Bravo was reporting a sensor malfunction. There was nothing left to fire. All stations. Brace for impact. Repeat. Brace for impact. 1:16 in the morning. In the mountains near Kermanshah, the Iranian commander stood before a wall of monitors. A high-altitude drone, loitering 50 miles away from the base, sent back a grainy infrared feed. He saw the massive orange mushroom cloud from the fuel farm. He saw the secondary explosions on the runway. Then, he saw a single, bright spark streaking toward the center of the American installation. "Target is in the terminal phase," the deputy said. His voice was a whisper. "The Americans have stopped firing. Their batteries are silent." The commander did not celebrate. He knew the weight of what was about to happen. A hit on the fuel farm was a message. A hit on a hangar full of aircraft was an escalation that could not be taken back. Watch the thermal bloom. We need to know if it hit the structure or the open ground. 1:17 in the morning. Inside Hangar number 4, the air felt like it was made of static electricity. The 6 fighter aircraft sat in a perfect row. Their wings were folded. Their cockpits were empty. The young mechanic under the landing gear of the lead jet gripped a torque wrench until his knuckles turned white. He could hear the scream of the missile now. It was a sound that didn't just fill the ears. It vibrated in the chest. It was the sound of the atmosphere being torn apart. The intercom system crackled once. Impact imminent. Get down. Get down. Get. The voice was cut off by a sudden, heavy pressure. The air in the hangar seemed to vanish as the missile struck the roof. The Fateh 110 did not explode on contact with the outer shell. Its hardened nose cap allowed it to penetrate the 2-foot-thick concrete roof before the delay fuse ignited the 500-pound high-explosive warhead. 1:18 in the morning. The explosion was a white-hot flash that turned the interior of the hangar into a furnace. The pressure wave expanded at 3,000 meters per second. It stripped the paint off the aircraft in an instant. The 6 jets, each weighing over 20 tons, were tossed like toys against the far wall. The structural steel beams of the roof twisted like wet paper. Inside the Combat Information Center, the lights flickered and died. The emergency generators kicked in 3 seconds later, bathing the room in a dull red glow. The tactical director looked at the sergeant. The sergeant's headset was around his neck. He was staring at a blank screen. The base was suddenly, terrifyingly quiet. The roaring of the Patriot launches had stopped. The whistling of the incoming missiles was gone. There was only the sound of a distant, crackling fire, and the low moan of the wind through the shattered windows of the tower. "Damage report," the director said. His voice was shaking. "Communications are down for the northern sector," the operator replied. "I am receiving a distress signal from Hangar 4. It is an automated fire alarm. Sir, the sensor says the entire structure is gone." The morning was no longer quiet. The sirens were beginning to wail. 1:19 in the morning. Hangar 4 was a skeleton of twisted steel and orange light. The fire was absolute. The 500-pound warhead had performed exactly as designed. It had turned the interior of the reinforced structure into a high-pressure furnace. Secondary explosions began to ripple through the debris. Fuel lines ruptured, pouring thousands of gallons of high-octane jet fuel into the flames. 6 advanced aircraft, the primary strike force of the region, were now nothing more than melting aluminum and charred carbon fiber. 1:19 and 30 seconds. Fire teams rushed toward the inferno. Their silver proximity suits reflected the glow of the burning wreckage. The heat was so intense that the rubber on their boots began to soften. They did not find survivors. They found a crater where the center of the hangar floor used to be. 1:20 in the morning. Inside the Combat Information Center, the atmosphere was frozen. The tactical director stood motionless. He looked at the status board. Red lights dominated the display. "Damage assessment," the director said. His voice was a harsh whisper. "Hangar 4 is a total loss," the sergeant replied. "We have multiple casualties reported. The medical bunker is overwhelmed." "Sir, the base commander is on the secure line." The director picked up the handset. "This is Control. We have sustained a direct hit on the primary hangar. 6 aircraft destroyed. We are currently in a mass casualty event." The response from the other end was cold. "Copy. The president has been briefed. The order for a retaliatory strike has been authorized. Target list Delta is now active." 1:20 and 30 seconds. 200 miles away, in the deep black of the Persian Gulf, a Navy destroyer turned into the wind. The ship leaned as its engines surged to full power. On the deck, the vertical launch system covers flipped open. The Tomahawk missiles inside were already powered up. Their internal guidance systems were receiving the final GPS coordinates for the Iranian missile sites at Kermanshah. The captain of the destroyer stood on the bridge. He did not look at the water. He looked at the countdown clock on the weapons console. "Weapons are slaved to the satellite link," the officer said. "T-minus 30 seconds to launch." "Confirm target package," the captain said. "Confirmed. We are hitting their command and control." 5 separate locations. Total of 40 missiles in the first volley. 1:21 in the morning. In the mountains of Iran, The atmosphere was equally tense. The Iranian commander watched the satellite feed of the burning airbase. He saw the fire. He saw the destruction. He also saw the American destroyer on his long-range radar. "The Americans are maneuvering," his deputy said. "Their silos are open. They are going to retaliate." The commander tightened his grip on the edge of the table. "They have no choice. Neither do we. Ready the second wave. If they fire one missile, we fire everything we have left. Target their ships. Target their regional headquarters." This is no longer a demonstration. 1:21 and 30 seconds. The technicians in the Iranian bunker entered the final authorization codes. The digital locks on 50 more Fateh missiles clicked open. In the silos across the province, the cooling systems began to hiss. The missiles were ready to fly. The world was 30 seconds away from a general war. The logic of escalation had taken over. There were no more diplomats. There were only commanders with their fingers on the keys. The American destroyer was 10 seconds from launch. The Iranian missiles were 10 seconds from ignition. The tension in both rooms was a physical weight. Men stopped breathing. They waited for the sound of the world breaking apart. 1:21 and 45 seconds. The American captain on the bridge of the destroyer gripped the armrests of his chair. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fire. The weapons officer pressed the launch sequence button. He expected the roar of the solid rocket booster. He expected the ship to shudder under the weight of the departing tomahawks. Instead, there was a sharp, high-frequency chirp from the console. The screen turned a flat, dull gray. Large white letters appeared across the center of the display. "Command override. Launch inhibited." "What is that?" the captain shouted. "Reset the sequence. Bypass the interlocks." "Sir, I cannot," the officer replied. His voice was frantic. "The entire fire control system is locked out. It is not a software glitch. It is an external command from the satellite link. We are being shut down from the outside." 1:21 and 50 seconds. In the mountains near Kermanshah, the foreign military commander turned his key. The launch sequence for the second wave was supposed to be instantaneous. He expected to feel the vibration of the missiles lifting off from the silos a mile away. The room went dark. The hum of the servers died. For 3 seconds, there was total silence. Then, the emergency red lights flickered on, but the consoles did not reboot to their tactical displays. Every monitor in the room showed the same image. It was a high-resolution, top-down view of their own mountain facility. It was a live feed from an altitude that should have been impossible to maintain. "Who is providing this feed?" the commander asked. His heart hammered against his ribs. "Is this an American drone?" "No, sir," the technician said. He was staring at his tablet. "Our sensors show nothing in the sky above us. Nothing. But the signal is coming from directly overhead. It is a wide-spectrum broadcast. It is overriding our internal fiber optics. They are not just watching us. They are inside the network." 1:22 in the morning. At al-Assad, the fires in Hangar 4 were still raging, but the air above the base had changed. A low, pulsing hum began to resonate through the ground. It was not the sound of an engine. It was a vibration that felt like a heavy weight pressing down on the base. The tactical director in the Combat Information Center looked up at the ceiling. The dust from the impact was still falling, but it wasn't falling straight down. It was swirling in a perfect, geometric pattern. "Director," the sergeant whispered, "look at the primary radar." The screen, which had been a mess of debris and clutter, was suddenly clear. Every ghost track was gone. Every piece of falling metal had vanished from the display. In their place was a single, massive contact. It was stationary. It was located exactly 300 miles above the center of the airbase. "Is that a satellite?" the director asked. "No, sir. It is too large, and it is not in orbit. It is holding position. It is exactly 1 mile wide. And sir, it just sent a transmission." 1:22 and 30 seconds. The transmission did not come through the speakers. It did not appear as text on a screen. Every person in the Military Combat Information Center and every person in the Foreign Military Command Bunker heard the same sound at the same time. It was a clear, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate inside their skulls. It was followed by a single word, spoken in a voice that was neither male nor female, delivered in both English and foreign language simultaneously. Cease. The foreign commander looked at his deputy. The military captain looked at his weapons officer. The weapons were cold. The screens were locked. The fury of the last 15 minutes had been extinguished as easily as a candle. The pivot had arrived. It was not a diplomatic breakthrough. It was not a technical failure. It was an intervention from something that did not belong to either side. The morning was silent again, but the silence was heavier than the war. 1:24 in the morning, the Persian Gulf. The captain of the destroyer stood over the weapons console. His hands were shaking. He had been 5 seconds away from launching a 40-missile volley that would have changed the map of the Middle East. Now, he was staring at a dead screen. The captain spoke to his weapons officer. Status on the VLS cells. Can we manual release the hatches? The officer shook his head. Negative, sir. The physical interlocks have been welded shut by some kind of high-frequency thermal surge. We cannot fire even if we bypass the software. The entire magazine is inert. And the satellite link? Can we reach 7th Fleet? It is gone. Everything is gone. We are receiving a repeating signal on all frequencies. It is a mathematical sequence. It is not human. 1:26 in the morning. Ain al-Assad Air Base. The tactical director stepped out of the Combat Information Center. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning jet fuel and ozone. He looked toward the remains of Hangar number 4. The fire was still orange and violent, but the smoke was behaving strangely. It was not drifting with the wind. It was being pulled upward into a tight, spinning vortex. He looked at the sky. High above the smoke, the clouds had parted in a perfect circle. There was no aircraft visible. There was only a void. It was a darkness that was darker than the night around it. It felt like a physical weight pressing down on his shoulders. A young airman stood beside him, clutching a rifle he no longer knew how to use. Sir, is it theirs? Did the Iranians build a cloaking platform? The director did not answer for a long time. He watched the void. No, if they had this, they would not have used missiles. Nobody on this planet has this. 1:28 in the morning, Kermanshah Province, Iran. The Iranian commander stared at the main monitor in his bunker. The image was still a top-down, high-resolution view of his own command center. He could see himself on the screen. He could see the fear on his own face. The commander turned to his deputy. Disconnect the primary power. Kill the generators. I want this facility dark. We tried, sir, the technician said. His voice was trembling. The servers are running without power. They are drawing energy from the ambient air. We are no longer in control of our own network. Every missile in the second wave has been deactivated. The liquid fuel pumps have been reversed. The missiles are being drained. The commander sat down. The adrenaline of the strike was gone. It was replaced by a cold, hollow realization. He had spent years planning the saturation of the American defenses. He had successfully destroyed 6 of the most advanced aircraft in the world. He had proven he could pierce the Patriot shield, and in 10 seconds, all of it had been rendered irrelevant. 1:30 in the morning. The 2 most powerful militaries in the region were suddenly, completely paralyzed. It was not a treaty that did it. It was not a diplomatic phone call. It was a demonstration of power that made their billion-dollar technology look like primitive stone tools. In the American Combat Information Center, the sergeant at the radar console spoke. Director, the contact is moving. The director rushed back inside. Where? Is it descending? No, sir. It is expanding. The radar signature just doubled in size. It is now 2 miles wide, and it is beginning to emit a low-frequency pulse. It is the same tone we heard before, the cease message. The pulse was felt by everyone on the base. It was not a sound. It was a vibration in the teeth. It was a warning. Both sides began a tactical withdrawal of intent. The American ships in the Gulf turned away from their launch positions. The Iranian missile crews stepped away from their consoles. They were no longer the apex predators in the room. They were children playing with matches who had just been found by a giant. The fire in Hangar number 4 continued to burn. But the war had ended before it could truly begin. 1:45 in the morning. The Combined Air Operations Center in Qatar, the most powerful command hub in the Middle East, was a room full of ghosts. General Miller stood in the center of the floor, surrounded by hundreds of black screens. The massive digital map that usually tracked every aircraft and missile in the region was gone. In its place was a single, pulsing cursor in the center of a gray void. The general spoke to his chief of staff. "Report on the fleet. Are we back online?" "Negative, sir. The destroyer in the Gulf is still dark. They are communicating via signal lamps and handheld radios. They report their engines are operational, but their fire control systems are physically fused. They are effectively a museum ship." "And the satellite array? Can we get a visual from the KH-11? The National Reconnaissance Office says the satellite is still there, but it is not looking at Earth anymore. It has been rotated 180 degrees. It is pointed at deep space. They cannot override the commands." 2:00 in the morning. Tehran. The underground briefing room of the Supreme National Security Council was lit by flashlights. The Iranian Minister of Defense sat at a wooden table, staring at a printout of the final satellite image received before the blackout. It showed the smoking ruins of Hangar 4 at Ain al-Assad. It also showed a perfect, circular shadow cast over the base, a shadow that had no source in the sky. The minister looked at his generals. "We have achieved the objective. The American strike capability at that base is neutralized. Why are we not celebrating?" The commander of the Revolutionary Guard spoke. His voice was low. "Because we did not stop them. Someone else did. Our missiles were deactivated in midair. The third wave did not malfunction. It was deleted. We are no longer the primary actors in this conflict. We are witnesses. Do we have communication with the Kermanshah facility? Only by courier. The electronic silence is absolute. It is a total blockade of the electromagnetic spectrum." 2:30 in the morning. Ain al-Assad Air Base. The tactical director walked toward the wreckage of the hangar. The fire had settled into a low, blue glow. The chemical foam from the fire trucks looked like snow in the moonlight. He stood at the edge of the crater created by the third missile. He looked up. The sky above the base was no longer dark. The clouds had formed a perfect, rotating ring around the zenith. Inside that ring, the stars were visible, but they were not the stars he knew. They were brighter. They were organized in patterns that felt deliberate. The pulsing hum in the air had changed frequency. It was no longer a warning. It felt like a heartbeat. The director pulled a small, digital recorder from his pocket. He began to speak into it. Log entry. 2:35 in the morning. Damage to hangar. 4 is absolute. 6 aircraft lost. Human casualties are still being calculated, but the tactical situation has shifted beyond our doctrine. The intervention is persistent. It is not moving. It is not communicating beyond the initial command. We are standing down because we have no choice. The weapons do not work. He paused, looking at the young airman who was still standing guard. The boy was no longer looking at the perimeter. He was looking at his own hands. "Sir," the airman said, "my watch. It is running backward." The director looked at his own wrist. The digital display was cycling through the hours in reverse. 3, 2, 1, 12. The mystery was not resolving. It was deepening. The blackout was not just affecting the radios. It was affecting the fundamental physics of the base. The morning was cold. The fire was dying. The world was waiting for a war that had been canceled by a power that did not recognize their borders. 3:05 in the morning. Ain al-Assad Air Base. The air over the Al-Anbar desert suddenly felt lighter. The oppressive, low-frequency hum that had vibrated in the bones of every soldier for the last hour vanished. The swirling vortex of smoke over Hangar Number 4 collapsed. It drifted lazily toward the east, caught by a natural morning breeze. The tactical director stood in the center of the base. He looked at his wrist. The digital display on his watch had stopped its frantic backward count. It blinked once. Then, it displayed the correct time. 3:06 in the morning. The temporal anomaly had ended as abruptly as it had begun. He looked up. The sky was empty. The perfect, rotating ring of clouds was gone. The stars were back in their familiar, ancient patterns. There was no sign of the mile-wide void that had paralyzed the two most powerful militaries in the region. 3:15 in the morning, inside the Combat Information Center. The screens flickered. One by one, the workstations rebooted. The familiar green and blue tactical maps returned to the displays. The global positioning system linked up with the satellite constellation. The digital silence was over. "Director," the radar sergeant said. His voice was weary but steady. "Primary radar is back. I am scanning the sector. The high-altitude contact is gone. There is no trace of the object on any frequency. Check the Iranian positions," the director ordered, scanning Kermanshah. "Sir, their radars are active. They are painting us, but they are not in a launch configuration. They are in a defensive posture." 3:30 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. On the bridge of the American destroyer, the weapons console suddenly chimed. The white override message vanished. The system status lights turned from red to a steady, calm green. The weapons officer looked at the captain. "Sir, fire control is restored. The vertical launch system interlocks are clear. The Tomahawks are ready. For the target package, we are at T-minus 10 seconds to the previous launch window." The captain looked at the screen. He could see the Iranian coast on the radar. He knew that 40 missiles were ready to fly. He also knew that his ship had been helpless only minutes ago. He picked up the handset for the secure fleet broadcast. "All units, this is Guardian. Stand down. Do not, I repeat, do not engage. Reinsert the physical safety keys. Return to condition." 3. "Sir?" the officer asked. "The crisis is over," the captain said. "Whatever that was, it told us to stop. I am not going to be the one to start it again." 400 in the morning. Kermanshah, Iran. The Iranian commander watched as his servers returned to life. His telemetry showed that his second wave of missiles was once again fueled and ready. He had the authorization to strike. He had the targets locked. He turned to his deputy. "The Americans have turned their ships. Their radar is no longer in fire control mode. They are watching us, but they are not aiming." "What are the orders from Tehran?" the deputy asked. "The orders are to maintain the status quo," the commander said. "We have destroyed their aircraft. We have proven our point. To fire now would be to invite a response from Assad. Power we do not understand. Deactivate the silos. Secure the facility." 5:30 in the morning. The sun began to crest the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the Iraqi desert. The smoke from the ruins of Hangar No. 4 was a thin, black line against the orange sky. The fire was out. The emergency teams were moving through the wreckage, tagging debris, and recovering what was left of the 6 aircraft. There was no cheering. There was no sense of victory. The American soldiers worked with a grim, quiet professionalism. They had survived a saturation strike. They had seen their most advanced defenses fail. And then, they had seen something that made the entire concept of war feel small. Inside the Combat Information Center, the tactical director sat at his desk. He began to type the final report for the initial engagement. 50 missiles launched, 47 intercepted, 3 impacts, 6 aircraft destroyed, 0 retaliatory rounds fired. He paused. He looked at the empty sky through a small window. The tactical objective of the adversary was achieved. The strategic response of the military forces was inhibited. The situation is resolved. But the definition of security has changed forever. The morning was quiet. For the first time in hours, the silence felt normal. 8:30 in the morning, 3 days after the strike. The Pentagon. The preliminary damage assessment was spread across a mahogany table in a windowless room. 6 advanced fighter aircraft were confirmed as total losses. The financial cost was calculated at $750 million. But the money was not the primary concern of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The analysts were focused on the 3 missiles that reached the target. The Patriot Advanced Capability 3 batteries had performed at 94% efficiency. In any other tactical scenario, that would be considered a triumph. But against 50 incoming ballistic rounds, 94% meant 3 catastrophic impacts. The math of saturation was now the new reality of modern warfare. One general spoke into the quiet room. "We built a shield that can stop a spear. Our adversaries simply threw 50 spears at once. We ran out of shield before they ran out of ammunition." The technical failure of the interceptors was being addressed. New software patches were already being uploaded to batteries across the globe, but the real discussion was about the final 10 minutes of the engagement. The official report called it a localized electromagnetic surge. It was attributed to a rare atmospheric phenomenon caused by the density of the explosions. The men in the room knew this was a lie. In Tehran, the official narrative was equally guarded. They showed grainy drone footage of the fire at al-Assad. They called it a historic victory. But inside the headquarters of the Revolutionary Guard, the atmosphere was one of profound unease. The commander of the missile unit had been questioned for 12 hours. He insisted that the second wave of missiles was fully functional. He testified that the launch sequence was inhibited by an external source. He described the resonance in his head. He described the single word: cease. His testimony was scrubbed from the record. The Iranian government could not admit that their most potent deterrent had been neutralized by an unknown force. It made them look weak. It made their victory look like a gift. Both nations had reached the same conclusion in secret. The weapons they had spent decades developing were now secondary. The real power in the region was something that did not have a flag. It did not have a name. It only had a command. The border between Iraq and Iran remained quiet. The American carrier groups stayed in deep water. The Iranian missile silos remained closed. For the first time in a generation, the threat of total war had been replaced by a shared, silent fear. The cleanup at al-Assad was almost complete. The wreckage of the 6 aircraft was loaded onto heavy transport planes and flown to a secure facility in Germany. The hangar floor was swept. The crater was filled with fresh concrete. From the air, the base looked normal again. But the soldiers on the ground did not look at the horizon anymore. They looked at the sky. 1 month later, Washington, District of Columbia. The classified report on the engagement at al-Assad was bound in a plain black folder. It did not contain the word miracle. It did not mention extraterrestrials. Instead, it used the phrase non-kinetic external interference. The strategic assessment was clear. The United States had lost 6 advanced aircraft to 3 primitive, mass-produced missiles. The Iranian military had lost its entire second-wave capability to a force it could not see. The lesson for the Joint Chiefs of Staff was a bitter one. Modern warfare had reached a point of diminishing returns. The more expensive and complex the defense, the more vulnerable it became to a simple surge of numbers. 50 missiles had broken the back of a billion-dollar shield. The intercept math was no longer in favor of the defender. Every nation with a stockpile of ballistic missiles now knew that a persistent swarm would eventually find a gap. In Tehran, a similar assessment was reaching the highest levels of government. The success of the strike was tempered by the total loss of control over their own weapons. The cease command had not been a suggestion. It had been a physical lockout of their national sovereignty. The Iranian commanders realized that their reach had exceeded their grasp. They had poked a hole in the fabric of regional stability, and something from the outside had reached through to stitch it shut. The world remained in a state of uneasy peace. No treaties were signed, no handshakes were photographed, but the tension in the Middle East dropped to its lowest level in decades. The 2 most aggressive actors in the theater were now looking over their shoulders. They were no longer focused on each other. They were focused on the sky. The remains of Hangar No. 4 were eventually replaced by a new, more resilient structure. It was built with deeper foundations and thicker walls. But it was empty. The 6 lost aircraft were not replaced by a new squadron. The base at al-Assad shifted its mission from offensive strike to regional monitoring. The pilots who once flew sorties over the desert now spent their days analyzing satellite telemetry, looking for the 1-mile-wide shadow that had changed history. The tactical director, who had commanded the Combat Information Center that night, resigned his commission 6 months later. He moved to a small house in the high desert of Arizona. He rarely spoke about the engagement. When he did not talk about the Patriot missiles or the Fate trajectories. He talked about the sound of the word cease. He described it as the voice of a parent walking into a room full of fighting children. Military history would remember the date as the night of the 50 missiles. The public would remember the burning hangar and the grainy infrared footage. But the men and women who were in the bunkers and on the ships knew the truth. They had witnessed the end of an era. The era of human-controlled conflict had been interrupted. Modern warfare is often described as a game of chess played at the speed of light. On that morning in Iraq, the players realized the board was not theirs. The pieces were moved by hands they could not see. The game was not won or lost. It was simply stopped. The desert wind now blows through the new hangars at Ain al-Assad. The sand covers the scars in the concrete. The sensors are still active. The radars are still spinning. The world continues to move toward its uncertain future. But for 1 hour, in the middle of a dark night, the fire was met with silence, and the silence won.